I don't like the term social engineering, but I like the term of behavior modification, whereby the good for the country is based on these premises, and we're going to use state power and state force, not coercion. We're not going to shoot people in the head for not allowing it, but we're going to basically incentivize this sort of behavior to have a proper country. And that behavior includes...
My guest is the South African podcaster and former Chief of Staff to the Minister of Agriculture, the leader of the Democratic Alliance, John Steenhuisen. Some would say the controversial, I would say at the very least by now, the very well-known French-born South African Roman Cabanac. Roman, welcome to my podcast.
Johan, a pleasure is all mine. And as I stated just before we started, you are the first person in 30 years to accurately say my name correctly. So I do appreciate that.
Fantastic. I think it's a great name. It's a beautiful name. So, before this discussion, I paged through some of the most recent headlines, and I want to read some of them here with a bit of a smile on my face. Steenhuisen admits in email that action against Cabanac was unfair. Cabanac demands 5 million rand from Steenhuisen over dismissal. Gave Roman Cabanac the chance he asked for. Cabanac asked for a chance to prove himself. Cabanac appointment, South Africa Jewish Council despises all forms of hatred and racism. Cyril Ramaphosa, I will work with Cabanac, even if he curses me. EFF, upset because Cabanac has still not been sacked by Steenhuisen. Steenhuisen's Cabanac headache won't go away. Roman, my question to you is, well, you've certainly shot to fame in South Africa, very well-known name established your name in South Africa in a terribly short period of time. Who should thank who? Steenhuisen you or you Steenhuisen?
So, Steenhuisen came to me and offered me the position in the first place, relatively out of the blue. So I have a relationship with him in terms of I do what you do. I was on YouTube for many years. I had a podcast before that for many years. So I knew Steenhuisen fairly casually, but not in a very familial sense at all. But we respected each other. If I used to send him a WhatsApp, he would answer 3 days later. And there we go. It was just convivial and we got along. But I didn't know too much about him until very close to the election of 2024 or just after the election. He called me out of the blue and he says, a little birdie told me you want to work in government. And I said, I'm not too sure which little birdie you're listening to, but it's not really my plan. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, we're still negotiating the GNU. We're still negotiating positions. Like, I want you to come work for me as the minister of whatever portfolio he will run. And I always say yes to everything. I don't think about the long-term consequences or the second or third order effects of most things because I trust my gut. And my gut says, listen, I've been criticizing this government of ours for the longest period of time, mostly because I love that country and I think it's being run terribly. If you have the opportunity to join and try and make any difference whatsoever in a positive way, you should absolutely join. You can't just sit on the outside of the tent all the time. So I said yes, without a moment's hesitation. And to this day, I signed the contract of employment on the August the 7th, 2024. So it was about a 3-month onboarding process. And even when I signed the contract, I actually couldn't believe it. It just came out of the blue, completely out of the blue. And I'm surprised they didn't prevent me from signing the contract. They asked for everything. They did a thorough vetting process, a thorough background check. And apparently all was fine. And I signed the contract on August the 7th of 2024, and I was officially his chief of staff on his request.
There's a couple of things that I want to just get clarity on. First and foremost, it's not a cynical question. You're saying to me you're moving kind of in the same social circles as Steenhuisen. Is that what I'm supposed to take out of that?
No. So I got to know him because I was a media personality, and I interviewed him a few times. I knew, and once you do interviews in South Africa, you realize that the DA is the only party at the time that understood what podcasts were. So they always said yes. Other parties didn't know or didn't respond or things like that. So I got to know the DA as a group rather well because they always said yes to interviews.
Yeah. Okay. So it's not because of social connections or family connections or anything like that. You're not around the same barbecue on a Saturday afternoon or anything like that. It's because of the podcast that he got to see you and got to know
Correct.
you. Which
Correct.
makes it more interesting for me then, Oman, because I'm trying to puzzle out what is it exactly that you said that is so offensive. The worst I got so far with my own little bit of research was the blacks can't be liberal statement that apparently you made, which I'm
Mhm.
puzzled. How could that be interpreted as racist? Or help me out here.
Well, I mean, the argument is it was in reference to something, and the reference was if you want to be a liberal party in South Africa, such as the DA, it will be almost impossible if you have a black leader to be a liberal party because blacks as a group are not liberal people. And this is something that I share with black South Africans. So it wasn't a denunciation. But the argument was that I made a categorical representation of something. So that's obviously racist in and of itself. And
That's a
that's
little
the,
bit ridiculous, isn't it, if I may say so? I
well,
mean, if you just inverse that, and I've heard that said by many leaders in South Africa, 85% of black people are conservative. That's a
correct.
that's a general reference that we hear because 85% of them are Christians or whatever the case might be. So I don't quite understand why is that a racist remark to make?
So there's a large confluence of factors. So I think the media is obviously very dishonest. I've picked up a few enemies in the media because I used to make videos. I used to make daily news videos of South Africa and the point of those videos was to take away market share from News 24 because I just found them abhorrent and I still do to this day.
Mhm.
So I think they were aware of this. I think the editor of News 24 and the deputy editor of News 24 really don't like me. I never met them in real life. We never spoken, but there was a bit of sniping on social media, and hey, I'm not on my best behavior at the best of times. If I can take a little dunk here or there, I'll take it. That's what social media is for, especially X, which is my playground.
Mhm.
So I think they were just waiting for the opportunity, for the most part, to say, okay, where can we get the most leverage against this guy? And the leverage happened when I was invited to join the government and I became officially part of the government. And that was one aspect. The other aspect is the internal politics of the DA. So John Steenhuisen is the leader of the DA. There was a lot of pressure. People want to be leader as well, and they'll use me as a sacrificial lamb to get ahead within the party. It's very catty. And I find both of these things, both of these influences, and apologies. The third influence was I don't have evidence for this, but if I was the ANC and the DA became my coalition partner, what leverage do I want over them to test their resolve? Why not go after a chief of staff of the leader of the DA and see what the DA does? I don't think the ANC cared about me in the slightest, but maybe it was a test to see the resolve of the DA in the GNU, a test which the DA has failed. So I think it was just a confluence of factors that came into play and yeah, it led to this weird situation where I was asked to resign 2 months after I signed the employment contract.
I also read somewhere that Steenhuisen said that he's dismissing you because of unspecified state security concerns. I wrote down here, failure to obtain the required security clearance. Just clear that for me. It's very vague. What does it mean when one say unspecified state security concerns?
My security clearance process was very quick, even for people were actually surprised at how quick it was. And basically, I passed everything. I had a 6-hour interview with state security. I took a polygraph test. They did a full background check. And I basically passed all of it until a final question was, are you a dual citizen? And I said, yes, of course, I'm a dual citizen of France, as I mentioned many times over. And then they said, well, this is all superfluous because we're not going to grant it to you because we don't grant it to dual citizens. And to this day, I haven't actually received confirmation that that is the reason why I was terminated. And I've never been given any proof that the State Security Agency actually did give that memo to the minister because I haven't been given it myself. So the broader point is that they contrived a way to get me out of the position. It was the
Yeah.
pressure that did it, but there was no legal framework to get me out of that position based on public pressure. It's just not a ground
Yeah,
to
yeah,
terminate
yeah,
someone. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. You know, the public perception, though, is that this is all about the so-called racial slurs or racial remarks or whatever the case might be. And I think also there was a reference to the American podcaster that you were a guest or something like that of some alt-right American podcaster. By the way, I had a look at some of the podcasts and I really was searching for some offensive stuff and couldn't find any offensive stuff. I was really trying to find out what is it that you said to this podcaster, Aaron McIntyre, I think is his name,
oh
and
right,
what he said that might have been offensive or anything like that. So I couldn't find it. So it all boils down, though, to Steenhuisen's position on all of this. And my question is, what does it say about Steenhuisen? Because he knew about this beforehand. And then we didn't
correct.
then add this to the discussion. I recently spoke to Ronaldo Gous, and Ronaldo, of course, had gone through the whole process as well. And one of the things that surprised me is that Ronaldo said, but you know, the DA knew years before about this. So what does it say
Correct.
about the Democratic Alliance? And what does it say about Steenhuisen himself then as a leader?
So well, I don't think there is. I don't think he is a leader in the real sense of the term. So, I mean, I have no animosity towards the man. I think he's a nice man. I think he wants the best for South Africa. I think he's earnest in that. But that entire party is so hamstrung on theorizing rather than governing, and there's a world of difference between the two. And it's the essence of liberalism, where if you want something done, you have a meeting about it. And in the meeting, like somehow the wisdom of the crowd in the meeting defines the result. Whereas the leader just says, I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
It's my decision. I invited Ramon in and I'm going to give him 6 months to prove himself. And if he doesn't, he's fired. That would have been a very reasonable way to solve this. And I even said prior to being appointed that, John, you know who I am, right? You've been on my show. I don't hold back. I'm happy to speak my mind. I believe in free speech. You must back me up when the media finds out. Yes, of course. Yes, of course. And then, no, of course not. Right. So it's yeah, it's a shame. It's a shame. I think we could have done wonderful things together in the Department of Agriculture. But unfortunately, the resolve and the fortitude is not as strong as we think. And at the end of the day, I think the GNU is broadly a creation of the funding elements of both parties, and that is far more important than the chief of staff that the minister chose.
But if you look from afar, Roman, and the way I look at it, it's almost as if there is this kind of pathological fear to be near somebody who might have said something that might be a little bit racist. Though if you objectively look at it, you think, well, I just don't see any racism in the statement that was made. It's all just a load of nonsense at the end of the day.
It is ridiculous, but it's also deeply cynical. So John's enemies within the parties used me as a scapegoat to put pressure on John. And at the end of the day, I mean, the assumption for me is, and the basis of my case, which we may discuss if you wish, the basis of my case is the DA made a decision that affects the employment contract of a government official, which is patently illegal and unlawful in my view. And that is borne out by the evidence, by the emails that he sent me, the one that said that he knew it was unfair, but he was under so much pressure that he couldn't do anything else or take any other decision. And after the fact, many former DA people came to me and said this happened to them on numerous occasions. You're in the good books, and then one day you say something wrong, or you make one mistake, or there's a contrived notion that you did something wrong, and the DA just spits you out like you'd never even existed, irrespective of your experience, irrespective of what you've done for them, irrespective of your sacrifices. And I think it's this notion for the DA that we need the black vote at all costs, and like we need to appease the imaginary black voter who's like hypersensitive to racism, which just isn't true in the slightest.
Yeah. I don't know. I must confess, I really dug relatively deep to find the dirt on you. which is my job, I guess,
Thank you.
even as a retired journalist. I got to find what it is that this guy said, and I came across this, and I thought, but this is absurd. This is totally ridiculous. But anyway, let's go past that. You've now sued the government, or you're part of this whole process is running right now. When do you expect what?
So we have two legal processes at the moment. One is a case at the Bargaining Council for unfair dismissal, which, and my grounds are based on my attorney, are very strong. And basically, I was unfairly dismissed in terms of the process wasn't followed and the reasons given were not justified. So that arbitration date is on the 1st of December of this year. I'm looking forward to that. And then, so that's basically you can claim reinstatement, which is what I've done. Alternatively, a year compensation. The other one is a breach of contract in the labor law, because if we say, okay, he was terminated unfairly, then the termination means that the employment contract was breached unilaterally and unlawfully. So there again, your claims can be reinstatement or the compensation for the duration of the contract. So those are the two things we are pursuing. The one will be heard now in December. The other one, hopefully next year, but it really depends on the backlog at the Labour Court.
Your experience in government, just for the hell of it and for the fun of it, what was that like? You spent, I don't know how many months, but you got the opportunity to sort of get a glimpse close to power. You moved in the power circles for some time officially. So what was that experience like, and what are the takeaways?
Also a bit Kafkaesque, and I will defer to a chap called Dominic Cummings, who was Boris Johnson's special advisor. He was on a podcast, of course, speaking about his term in government, and it reflected mine to a T. So I'll just combine them together. Number one, the politicians don't actually run the state; the bureaucrats do. And the bureaucrats justify their power through process, not results. So for 8 months, I just remember having just an enormous amount of paperwork and emails and all sorts of things, but none of which actually had an effect on the goals of the minister, right? The goals of the minister were very simple. We need to have more market access for South African products overseas. That means we have to have good biosecurity at home in South Africa, and then we need rural safety for farmers. Very simple goals, very good goals. None of the things I did had any effect on those goals whatsoever. There's just so much process. You can't actually make a decision because you have vested interests everywhere. You have the department who works against you. You have 1990s software as a culture within that department. So very antagonistic towards the market, very antagonistic towards private actors, very antagonistic towards exports of like the Western world. So without real authority and leadership, it's impossible to get anything done for the most part. But on the other hand, now that I've seen it, I am far less concerned about the future of South Africa because there's just no virility to make this place terrible.
Did you, I don't know what your experience was in the private sector, but did you feel that experience that in your talk about this testosterone in government now, the lack thereof, virility, the lack thereof? Do you experience that as well in general terms, that it's kind of over bloated and tired, sagging, not effective, incompetent?
The government itself or the private sector? Oh, yes, governments. Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we have people who are paid a good salary to read the news every day, cut out clippings, put on an email and just send it to you. Like, this is the news of the day. Like, I can do it myself. Like, or AI can do it. Like, there's so much bloat. And the Director General, who's a very good man, I met him a lot and we discussed many things, and I'm very fond of him. But you're beholden to those who are the most authoritative, and it's often not the leadership of the department. It's often the sub-leadership or the middle management or the HR person or whatever the case might be. So the fights in the department are far greater and far more important to the department than the fights against South Africa as a whole. And I can only assume that applies to every single department in this country. And the people that fill those posts in those departments are not top of their class. Let me just be polite. So I think many just see it as a cushy job, and we should be grateful for that. If they saw it as a raison d'etre, if they saw it as something that has impact, we would be Venezuela today.
The role that you had, would you want it back? And for what reasons would you want it back, if so? Is it, in other words, is it a good cushy job to have? You earn good money, it's a job that you can handle, or is there something more about the job itself that, in terms of your political aspirations, your ideals, your hopes for the country, the future of the country, etc., etc.? What is attractive about the job?
I don't have political aspirations anymore. Now that I've seen how it works, it's not something I don't want to. I don't want to corrupt my soul
Sorry to hear that.
by joining it. But I mean, I would love the rollback, mostly because everything else is so mediocre. Just being above that standard median, you can make great impact, in my view. And I think the impact agriculture can make to South Africa in terms of employment, exports, things like that, is that the leverage is just so much higher for the inputs. The inputs are very simple. The outputs could be magnificently much larger than whatever inputs you put in. And I think agriculture has been largely neglected in favor of land reform for the past 30 years. This is the first time in many years agriculture has had its own portfolio. There are many problems in agriculture that needs to be sorted out at a government level. I mean, farmers cannot have market access to China on their own. They need a government to actually initiate their process. Yeah. And it has been coming along, but I just think it really was a chance for me to be part of something that could fundamentally change South Africa. That was the whole PR of the GNU, right? So because the government changed, the mindset I had changed as well. When you have new facts, you must have new opinions. I was a big critic of America under Joe Biden, but now that Donald Trump is there, I'm less of a critic. I don't agree with everything, but I can understand why he is popular. Same with the GNU. When it started, my mind changed. I'm not just fighting a government that doesn't represent me. No, I'm actually part of it. That's a truly South African story. It's like an American dream, but a South African version. So I want it back because we can actually make a big difference to farmers' lives and to farm workers and food security and all the basic things that make civilization. If you don't have that, you don't have much else.
Yeah. Let's talk about the GNU for a moment, and I'm going to give it from my perspective, and it really is, and we in the rest of the world, South Africans, the South African diaspora, it seems to many of us from the beginning, from the start, as the GNU is a kind of an artificial construct. It's constructed to keep out the enemy. I think Steenhuisen, in fact, said so in the White House as such. So if it is an artificial construct, in terms of, there's a difference in terms of foreign policy, there's a difference in terms of so many policy issues. How could it possibly ever work, and how do you think it is working at the moment, and what is the future of the GNU?
So I spoke to Dr. Corne Mulder, the leader of the Freedom Front Plus last week, and he made a very good point. He says the Constitution gives you 14 days after an election to elect a president. So it's not understanding that 14 days is nothing. How do you come up with a policy statement? How do you come up with an agreement? How do you come up with the new goals of whatever potential coalition there is? And in essence, so there's that shortcoming. But on the GNU specifically, and he mentioned it as well, basically said there was never a plan to have any form of shared goals. All the ANC did was invite people in, and then you just pursue ANC policy. There's no mechanism to change that whatsoever. Mm. The funders of both parties like the GNU because they keep their power, they keep their influence, and South Africa dragging along the bottom is actually very good for elites to control a lot of the economy, right? Mm. There's a lack of competition, there's a lack of upstart, there's a lack of startups. So in essence, it is completely manufactured by the funding or the funders of each political party who happen to fund quite a few others at the same time. And it's there to really pacify the market, but without changing it to make life better for anyone.
Yeah. Yeah.
As for what the future is, I don't know until Cyril Ramaphosa goes. I think it can only work with Cyril Ramaphosa. I don't think it can work with anyone else in the ANC. And the big lie at the time was we were worried about this doomsday coalition with the EFF and MK. It was obvious from the elections both of them would implode very quickly. There was nothing holding those parties together. So the hard left is in decline in South Africa. The centre is holding. The DA is still polling quite well. The ANC is in a free fall in terms of support. So the only thing holding the GNU together is fundamentally the DA. But I think the positions and the blue lights and the business class tickets and the meeting of Xi Jinping and going to the White House, it's very intoxicating. It really is. But I don't think the DA is fundamentally able to see any other alternative that makes sense for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they will be kicked out rather than leave, in essence.
Yeah. But I think also it's probably can be predicted that at least a year or so before the next election, some of these parties will start pulling out. A predictable political game to play.
That's my view as well. So I'm less concerned about the GNU now. I'm thinking about what is the future of South African politics. And I think it's going to be this weird, difficult coalitions going forward, similar to what you have in the Netherlands or Germany or whatever the case might be. But it's very short-term thinking, very short-term strategies. No one's going to agree. But sooner or later, there will be some sort of populist that rises up, whether it be, well, we tried left-wing populism, and it appears that South Africans don't like that. Right? As soon as the ANC signed NHI, they signed all these other expropriation acts, their support cratered completely. Same with the EFF. MK is slightly different. But what will that populist look like in 10 years or 15 years or 20 years? I don't know. I mean, hopefully he's right wing. Then I would support him. But it's just going to be this fragmented coalition politics going on for the next at least a decade. I can't see it change anything else. And based on that, I don't expect any form of recovery for South Africa in the material sense.
Let me talk for a moment about your personal journey, get to know you a little bit. You were born in Paris, France, if I'm correct.
Correct.
In 1987, I jotted down here for me. That was 3 years before Nelson Mandela walked out a free man. Question one, what brought your family to South Africa?
Economic opportunities. France at the time was run by a socialist, Mitterrand, if I remember.
I really had a big smile on my face when you said economic opportunities. Now, for a moment, it just sounded so unreal for a moment. But please go ahead.
I did. So at the end of sanctions, sanctions were still ongoing.
New opportunities.
I do apologize for the hardy-dars, but it's endemic. But I think we were still sanctions. Mandela was basically freed, I think, by the time we arrived. And then my father was like, the country that I wanted to move to is like completely different now. Like the moment we took that decision, the moment we arrived, like everything changed. So, and then he said, "Oh well, we'll just make it work." And life has been really good to us here. I grew up on a farm in the south of Johannesburg, so I grew up with horses and shooting things. And my favorite memories are actually going to farm workers' braais. Like you used to have a sheep over a spit roast, huge slabs of salt encrusted in there. Great time. And then, unfortunately, crime took effect in the farming area where we were in. We were broken into and held up numerous times. So we moved to the city, Johannesburg, in which I reside at the moment. And politically, I've never been a Marxist. I'm one of the few people that I know where in your youth, if you're not a Marxist, you have no heart. I never had a heart. I've never been anywhere on the left ever. I do find some of the left thinking very interesting, but I think it fails upon further analysis. I went to Wits for my LLB, and that was just before the Fees Must Fall fiasco started, and that resolved my heart even more to become even more radical in terms of law and order and tightening the freedom belt, so to speak. And now I think I'm a mixture of a 1993 Bill Clinton and a 2025 Nayib Bukele with a healthy dose of Lee Kuan Yew mixed in. I think people need leadership. I think people need authority.
Were you referring to the Salvadorian leader now in that mix?
Correct. Nayib Bukele, yes. Absolutely.
And
He's a
Bill
hero.
Clinton.
Well, Bill Clinton was very reasonable and pragmatic, right? He deported more people than Donald Trump. But now we can't say those things. Not that I like Bill Clinton or his policies, but he was a reasonable, pragmatic person. So if we can take the reasonable pragmatism with the leadership and authority of Nayib Bukele of El Salvador and Lee Kuan Yew, we can get very far. And these are not things that are radical. We don't need to change the laws. We don't need to, for South Africa at least, we don't need to think of new wonderful ideas to do things. We just have to apply the law ruthlessly. And 80% of the problems can be solved very quickly.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to talk about that with Ruthless in a few minutes with you. But first, when you were a kid, when you grew up in South Africa, in an exhilarating time in the history of South Africa, and I can well imagine very attractive for a young French couple to settle down in this newly born, free country, Nelson Mandela, etc., etc. But what was your understanding as you grew up and you became more conscious and more aware of? What was your first understanding of the history of South Africa and of apartheid? What did apartheid mean to you as you grew up as a kid? How did you understand it?
Very little. I had no experience in it. So the area where I grew up in, which was the south of Johannesburg, for some reason, the farm next door was inhabited by police officers, white police officers, and they used to be deployed to quell the township violence in the 80s and the early 90s around the People's War when the ANC declared war on their black opposition. And it was very rare for me just to find someone who was deeply ideological. Right, these at the time in the 90s, these people were late 30s, 40s, sometimes hitting 50s. Now they must be in this almost 70s, I would suspect. I haven't seen them in a long time, but all I know is the people in the farming area used to reminisce. Like they used to talk about the rugby tours in the 50s or the 60s or things like that. But I can't remember anyone saying loving it, if that makes sense. And even to this day, I have no concept of apartheid. And I was never here. My family wasn't here either. So there's no ingrained memory over the Cabanac family tree where it matters. Looking at it objectively, it's so obvious why it failed. You can't separate people but rely on them for labor and then have all these weird little laws to make sure that they're not inherently free, but you do need their labor and work, but then you sort of remove them later on. Like it was obviously just full of contradictions that never worked. But they followed an industrialization policy that really worked. South Korea followed the same policy. Japan followed the same policy. They knew what they were doing in that sense, but at a cost, I think, which was very grave, right? At a cost that destroyed what they wanted to build. So I have no affinity or affiliation to it. Never have, never will. I like to study it objectively as someone who loves history. I find some parts of it very fascinating, but it's never been part of my identity, so I don't really know how to act like it is.
But if you reflect now, I can imagine your mother, your father came to South Africa. You born in Paris, so they I would imagine a young couple with their family come to South Africa. How did they understand apartheid? How did they embrace the idea of this multicultural new South Africa? Did they wave the flags of freedom and set up the balloons for Nelson Mandela? And
no. We were
so they were not. So they were, if I may say so, probably atypical of the time because the whole of Europe was celebrating the freedom of South Africa. So were they atypical or just not interested? Or
so the one thing is my family is not political at all. So due to circumstances, we found ourselves here due to a decision made by my father, I assume. And all I remember my father doing is working to this day. And he's close to 70 now. He works really hard. He's never been political. His favorite president is Jacob Zuma because he made the most money under Jacob Zuma. And
quite a statement to make.
Yes.
Jacob Zuma.
My father is a real businessman and entrepreneur, and he thanks, he blesses his country because he couldn't be as successful in France even now, despite having the same work ethic. So No. We were immigrants. We came in here. We tried to fit in as much as possible. As far as I remember, we used to have to learn what a braai is and speak Afrikaans. And we had a lot of Afrikaner neighbors and black people who had to move into that area as well. We used to go to the game, not the game auction, like the farming auction. Used to buy a pony or a
Mhm.
cow. We had a small holding, so a lot of sheep and goats. We had a domestic worker. We had a gardener. We always treated them well. My father paid for the schooling of the children of those people. Everyone around us had farm workers that used to trespass into our land, but it was part of the way things were done. And I never felt any sort of antagonism or animosity or anything like that amongst any person, really.
Yeah,
It was
yeah.
a small
Did your
farming area.
Roman, did your parents um, they must have they must have brought you up also at least with the French identity as well. Uh,
Yes.
did they inculcate or sort of instill in you the idea of your Frenchness, your French history, your French character, whatever the case might be, or and how much of you still has that identity in you today, as opposed to obviously the new South African identity that must have developed and grown spontaneously
So
within you.
my father's nickname was Franse Boer. So a boer maak 'n plan, 'n Franse boer maak twee, as the saying goes. So my father fits in very well, mostly because I don't want to talk about my family very much, but my father did find great affinity with Afrikaners in the
Mhm.
90s, right? A lot of his clients were Afrikaners, a lot of his social group were Afrikaners. Even to this day, we have a lot of Afrikaner friends, not because they're Afrikaners, but we just have an affinity. And we were not like bourgeois French people. We were sort of middle, lower class French people until we arrived in this country. So never were liberal, just old school.
Yeah,
Um, and by French history, I mean French history stopped after the French Revolution. Anything before that was fantastic. Anything after that's just dismal.
yeah. And your own kids, Roman, are you making a point of teaching them the French language as well, or part of the French culture? I mean, it's not a
I mean,
good or a bad thing. I can imagine it's a
yeah.
good thing to do so. Your roots are your roots, and it's something to be proud of.
No, I take them over whenever I can, every 2 years or so. I mean, they're still small now, so we just came back. We were there in August to visit my family members. So we try to see them every year, or every 2 years rather, and then the alternating years they come to where we are, to South Africa. Excuse me. Yeah, I think this national identity is losing its glamour and its polish every year because what the hell is it to be proud of if you're French? The place is a basket case, right? I mean, I appreciate the food, I appreciate the history, I appreciate Napoleon and the King Louis XIV and the splendor of Versailles, but this is a postcard. This is not France.
I agree. I agree with you,
Yeah.
Marn, if you say that France is a mess at the moment. But I do think that you have the French history and culture is of great greatness. There's no doubt
Oh,
about.
I mean, it's the saddest thing that it's no longer here.
Yeah,
It's
or
something
that you're
that wounds
losing.
me. Yeah, well, it's something that wounds me very deeply. That if you go to France, you're in France because there's a baguette and the Eiffel Tower, but there's no overarching societal culture anymore, unless you go to the rural areas. But yes, it's just not my country. I go often, and I'm always extremely happy to come back. I love going. I love spending time there, but when I come back, I'm far happier.
Yeah. I must say there's a part of this discussion in which it seems to me you create the impression a little bit of you're not really politically interested, but you are, and you were. After all, you created this political party some years ago. What 2019? You created I think it was with the ZACP, not to be
Correct.
confused with the SACP.
We wanted that name, but the communists copyrighted it. So I said,
Aha.
this is most hypocrisy.
Yeah,
Anyway, we
but
didn't win
but
that
the
again.
ZA works very well, by the way.
It does. So the idea was, it wasn't my creation. I was a co-founder. So a very good friend of mine, Kanthan Pillay, came to me and said, he's got this idea for a political party that's basically based on 10 principles or 10 policies. And it ranges from teaching female pupils at school to shoot guns, to a variety of other things like school vouchers, not having a Department of Education, for example. It's a very free market. It was only based on economics. We had no interest in social affairs. Once you solve the economics, perhaps you can solve the other stuff too. And we managed to receive I believe it was 16,000 votes in 2019. We were promised funding that didn't arrive, so we already had a shoestring budget, and so we put it all into digital adverts. And we still beat Black First Land First, who was on the front page every second week. So not too bad.
Yeah. The ZACP, you chose as a logo a purple bull. I saw the picture of the bull. In fact, I'm going to put it on the screen as well, which I love, by the way. I think it's kind of, when I use the word funky now, I'm way too old to use the word funky, but it is kind of funky to use a purple bull as your logo for a political party in South Africa. So the question what I'm trying to get to is, you just said you were not you didn't care much about social issues. Your focus was economic issues.
At that time, yes.
I find it kind of weird, because one would imagine that social issues should be the preeminent thing that would be in the thoughts of a young person, looking at the complex nature of not only South Africa's, the composition of our people, but also the history of our land. It seems to me, and I'm not saying it is like that, but you almost suggest a lack of interest in what is the, I would say, most fundamental characteristic about South Africa, namely its multicultural nature. And the problems that's part of that, the issue around that, the history of that.
Well, Munir, I think you failed to understand that I was a hardcore libertarian. So back then, at least, everything could be solved through economics and freedom. So as you well know, that's the mantra. All these social issues are basically incorrect economics. Okay. So if you fundamentally solve that, the rest solves itself, because then people have freedom to pursue what's in their best interest, and they will choose to live in peace and harmony and the free market.
Okay, but now that's the politician that's talking. So there is a politician there.
Yeah, so I have changed dramatically, and now I think the state should be a vector for, I don't like the term social engineering, but I like the term of behavior modification, whereby the good for the country is based on these premises, and we're going to use state power and state force, not coercion. We're not going to shoot people in the head for not allowing it, but we're going to basically incentivize this sort of behavior to have a proper country. And that behavior includes marriage. That behavior includes fundamentally having children within marriage. It fundamentally means having some sort of moral foundation for what schools do or what social institutions do. But, other times it's allowing state-owned enterprises to actually make a profit. I think that's also very important for that to happen. And basically disincentivizing anything that goes against that. So if there are criminals in the street, you should be allowed to shoot them as a police officer or a security company or a security guard. You should have all the powers vested in you, knowing that there is austerity in South Africa for the most important things, but not austerity for what the ANC wants. You should use state power not to privatize policing, but to give the same effect to private actors to act in the interest of the state through the powers given to you by the state. In essence, what I'm trying to say is, if you look at El Salvador, to solve a problem like El Salvador had, which was a murder rate of 130 per 100,000 people, the highest in the world, you need the entire state to focus on that and solve that. You can't solve it through decentralizing power. You can't solve that through private actors. All the incentives are wrong. The only incentive that matters is, do you have the authority and can you do it, and what the goal is. So I've really changed my view on the state can be an actor for good if you have correct leadership and authority within it, which we currently don't have at the moment. But examples of states where this works is Singapore, is China, is Russia, is El Salvador, is Chile at the moment, is Hungary, is Poland. With real leadership, real things happen. And that's just something we just don't have currently in South Africa. So I'm no longer a libertarian.
Let me try to unpack that and help me out here and give me an idea of what is your political philosophy then. The most important pillar would be, of course, a free market, that I would say is the most important pillar in the vision you described to me now. And the second one seems to me that you're suggesting a kind of government that creates and settles on a social code which you impose on the people,
Mhm.
be it through force or not.
Or preferably
Am I
without force.
am I touching on the two core points in what you just described
No.
to me now
So, so,
accurately or not?
so I think the free market does destroy a lot of the stuff that I care about.
Hmm.
Um, so you have two income households now because the state would prefer to tax two people in a household as opposed to one, as an example. And that's free market. We allow women to choose what they wish to do, which does include forming a family. So I think those are bad incentives based on market dynamics. I'm not saying we can reverse this. I'm not saying there's a golden magic blue pill that the government can do that can solve all these issues. But I do think if there is a moral foundation to the state's purpose, and in South Africa it would be Christianity, since most people are Christian, over 80% of them are Christian, with disincentives for behaviors that don't fit within that moral foundation, and coercion against those who wish to destroy it. I don't know how it looks like. I don't have this set out in my mind. I'm still wondering. No one has ever asked me what, as a dictator, I know what I would do immediately. But as a democracy, I would find it very difficult to implement in any meaningful way. And I don't, I've never been pro democracy. I've never been a Democrat. I don't think democracy is the best system beyond all the others. I think it's a system that allows mediocrity to rise because it's based on negotiation rather than action and authority. So I'm far more interested in the authority leadership question than the effects of what you could do. Let's solve that question first. Who has the authority to do it? And then what comes through it is very simple to understand. But I don't know how that authority figure looks in a democracy. And I don't think it will make much
Well, how
impact
do
in
you
that.
get that authority figure is my question, if not through a democratic process? How who becomes that figure that you're talking about, this autocratic figure that you described?
Well, in Africa, we'd like coups, so that could work. But I don't think that will work. We like coups, but I don't think we should actually have a coup here. I think it has to come through democracy, ironically enough. I think you have to win a majority election, very much like Nayib Bukele has done in El Salvador. And with that authority, you must suspend everything that goes against you. So in essence, he suspended the constitution for a number of years. And he said, all we're going to do is focus on sorting out crime. And crime is concentrated in 10% of the population
Yeah.
who happen to be gang members, who happen to have tattoos, who are easily identifiable. So we're going to destroy them, take them out of society completely. And then after
But you
that,
can't tell me that you can draw uh, uh, a character profile on somebody based on whether that person has tattoos or not, and the number of tattoos, or whether tattoos are placed on the body. That sounds it sounds ridiculous.
well, in El Salvador, it's a gang sign. If you're a member of a gang, you have tattoos signifying that. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm just talking about that example. I'm not saying we should impose it yet. Otherwise, half of Centurion will be in prison, even though they just like want to watch rugby on weekends.
Mm-hmm.
No, but I'm just talking about the authority. And what was the question? I apologize. What were you
No,
asking
no.
me
Well,
originally?
no. Let me rephrase this for you. You seem to be, and I take this out of this discussion here. You seem to be a great fan of Bukele, the
Yes,
president of San Salvador. Um,
correct.
he's also much criticized internationally for, I've written it down here, arbitrary detentions, detention
Mhm.
of individuals without sufficient legal basis, putting people in overcrowded and inhumane prison conditions, 300, stretching the capacity with something like 300%. I've got a whole lot of stuff written down here
Yeah.
about Bukele. And I and
Written
I
by
and I
who?
did research Bukele specifically because of one of the podcasts that I saw you making reference to how you would deal with crime in South Africa. That seems to me a little bit severe, though, especially for somebody that has, you have a French background, my friend. Aren't you about freedom? Aren't the
No,
French supposed to be?
well, I think what is severe is hundreds of women being raped every single day, children being mutilated and left in garbage bins, babies being raped, 84 murders a day. I think that is severe,
I agree.
with absolute respect. And if you have to break a few eggs to solve that fundamental problem, then so be it. In all democracies everywhere, you get jailed for bullshit. Excuse my language, I apologize. In Britain, if you send a mean tweet, you go to jail, right? So I actually don't care about the eggs. I don't care about the repercussions. You must do it as orderly as possible. But all those things that you've said about Bukele right now have been probably written by the enemies, by NGOs, by foreign-funded NGOs, by media websites not based in El Salvador. He just won a re-election with 91%. That is a far more important measure of the man than anything the media says, anything NGOs say, anything the State Department of America says. Thankfully, now they're on his side with Donald Trump. You need to solve the problem, right? And if you don't, everything else doesn't matter. If you don't solve crime here, if you don't stop suffering here, nothing else matters. BE or land rights or whatever, it doesn't matter. You need to solve the problem. What is the quickest, most efficient way to solve the problem is to follow what El Salvador did. You suspend the constitution, you pick the spots in the country that produce 80% of the crime, you cordon them off, you arrest everyone inside who breaks the law in front of you, and you build the biggest prison in the Southern Hemisphere, and you put them there without trial until you solve the problem. You're not going to get it through criminology, right? We've been told for years that crime is a social issue and it's this issue and no. Crime happens because people are bad. Take them out of society. We've done it for hundreds of years. In Europe, we send those people to war or we send them to colonize somewhere else. And Europe became very peaceful when all the angry, young, deranged men left or died. Same thing applies in any part of the world that is extremely violent. Without solving that, the rest doesn't matter. Without making people safe, the rest doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. So you do whatever you can in your power to make that happen. And the costs are very minor compared to what the costs are if you don't do it, in my opinion.
It's an interesting view, and as I said right at the offset, I'm not here to debate these issues, but it is an authoritarian view that you're taking, and it goes against the principles and the ideals of the democracy, which I think we would like to support. But be it as it may, you see the free market essentially as the golden key. Let me just back to the question of solving the problem of crime. What would you say to those that say to you that if you want to solve the problem of crime, you have to solve the problems of poverty?
Well, crime causes poverty, not the other way around.
That's not a very scientific statement. I mean, it's relatively well researched that where countries economically do well, you have less crimes, and where the economy is really suffering and people are suffering in poverty, the crime rises extraordinarily, as we have it in South Africa. Poverty is the root cause of crime.
No, incorrect. Why is South Africa the richest nation in Africa yet the most violent? If that was the case, if your argument holds, it does not. Crime causes poverty. If you don't solve crime, you create poverty. What does crime create? It creates disinvestment. It creates a low trust society. It creates tax evasion. It creates a variety of things that fuel crime. If you don't solve crime, you cannot solve poverty at all. I can't think of a single nation in the world who is rich and crime-ridden. I can think of many poor nations who are crime-ridden and will never be rich because they refuse to solve it. But South Africa is the richest nation in Africa and happens to be the most violent. In Zimbabwe, the police are fantastic. They solve crime or they prevent it. They're much poorer than us. Equatorial Guinea is much poorer than us. Mozambique is much poorer than us, other than the civil war in the north. These are all safer than South Africa. Why do they manage to solve crime? In an undemocratic, authoritarian way, they manage to do it. Yet we find ourselves in the third most violent country in the world, the richest nation in Africa, and we can't seem to solve crime. Crime is making us poor. It's not the other way around. And all the criminals are much richer than you and me, my friend.
Do you think that South Africa has managed to create a successful multicultural democracy? Do you think that we have That's one part of the question. And the other part of the question is, do you think that white South Africans do have some moral obligation in terms of the history towards black South Africans?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by moral obligations. If you're referring to tax, to reparations, I don't know if you are alluding to that. I think we
Well,
paid enough.
it's obviously it will include things like black economic empowerment and policies that will favor the disadvantaged, et cetera, et cetera. Do we have that obligation towards black people in South
Yeah.
Africa 30 years post apartheid?
Well, I think 30 years later is a bit too late now. But I think there was an obligation at the beginning. And I think there was a lot of goodwill to make it happen. And it's been squandered in the most distasteful way. In terms of paying back, some people that say they want reparations. Okay, how many trillions of rands have been given by the so-called white monopoly capital to the state that have been squandered? So I think the time for revenge, not that it has happened or will happen, because the average South African is so pragmatic and centrist that we don't need revenge for anything. We just need leadership at the end of the day, and these questions won't matter. If we had a 5% unemployment rate and we had an economic growth of 5% over 30 years, these questions wouldn't matter and the ANC would be at 80%. We already know how to fix it. Mm-hmm. So looking at the squandering of the opportunity, I don't think whites or other minorities are under any impression that they should be owing anyone anything whatsoever, and they're going to become more insular, and they're going to look after themselves as I have done. Right? I'm a father. I'm a husband. These 5 people in my house matter more to me than anyone else. Mm-hmm. And that's my goal, is to protect them, to fend for them, to make their lives great, and hopefully have a better future in some manner. But as for a thriving multicultural society, I think it's already there, because the average South African is pragmatic and centrist and doesn't seem to care too much about racism. All of these things are psyops of the mass media organizations and the politicians. If Malema never existed, and if the ANC was never racial, I don't think we would hear about race ever in this country, because I think on the ground people just don't care.
Yeah. But Malema does exist, and the ANC does exist, and we have these problems, and there are those that are calling for, like an Aaron's Roots and AfriForum and Solidarity, that are talking about ways in which you can have some form of devolution of power, or whatever the case might be, suggesting that the ideas of some form of cultural autonomy or cultural rights, or whatever the case might be. So back to my question, and I think the broad question in South Africa at the moment is, does this multicultural dream of Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu, the Rainbow Nation, does that work? Or is there something in what people like Aaron's Roots and other people are agitating for, namely devolution of power, bringing more autonomy to smaller regions, Kleinfontein, Oranje, the existence of them, potential of splitting up the country, balkanization, that part of the discussion?
Well, if there's nothing else that prevents it, that's absolutely what's going to happen, right? If there's no countervailing force against balkanization will happen for the most part. So whether people want it or not. So unless you actually solve the problem through state power and authority and leadership, balkanization will occur, not because I want it, but because that's the only solution.
When you set up the Capitalist Party, one of your 10 ideas was a free market, and you call it a free markets and international free trade based on enlightened self-interest. Explain to me, what do you mean with enlightened self-interest? And then you mention here, if the best source for oil is Iran, or the best source for technology is Israel, such trade should be given preference. Nelson Mandela agreed with you, but free trade with whoever serves your interest and serves the interests of the other party.
Correct.
Does it mean that you would support trade with, or good business with Iran?
If they have something to offer that no one else can, absolutely. For a price that is right and that is for the national interest, absolutely. I mean, we have this relationship with Iran, or the ANC does, and we have no benefits as a country. We don't get cheap oil from Iran. We don't get technology. Actually, they take our technology through MTN, which is why the sanctions are coming. But we have zero benefit to being in relationships with these countries now because the ANC refuses or doesn't understand how to negotiate anything. The Chinese, the Russians, the Iranians, these are not my foes. These are not my friends. They are potential partners. If Iran has something we need, we should make a deal with them. Israel has something we need to make a deal with them. We should just follow the Indian foreign minister, for lack of a better term. He gets cheap oil from Russia. He gets technology from America. He gets things, whatever, desalination plants from Israel. He trades with everyone in the world.
Tolerance and absolute protection of freedom of expression. That's something that I fancy myself. My question is, does that include getting rid of bans on the K word? Does that mean accepting and tolerating things like Holocaust denial or swastikas or Nazi salutes or Zeal hikes? Or how far do you go in terms of freedom of expression?
So I'm less worried about that. I'm a big First Amendment kind of guy. The American First Amendment makes sense to me, but I do think that contextually, I don't think it's very good to apply to South Africa in a practical sense of the term. So theoretically, I can understand why people are for free speech, as I am, almost absolutely for free speech, as I am. But contextually, it doesn't make that much sense to impose a sort of First Amendment, American style, into the South African diaspora, especially now with the amount of political fragmentation that we actually have at the moment. But in theory, yes, I very much am in favor of that.
You're a great believer in the power of the free market. Do you think that a free market, the total idea, however broad you may define that, is the answer for solving the social problems of South Africa?
No, not in total. So in principle, I think the freer the market, the better people live. And this is borne out through history and evidence. But I do think the state can take targeted actions against some things to solve a particular problem that does distort the market in that way, as it has been since the inception of the state, right? There was never this utopia where the free market existed and people just became the trading atomized individuals. That has never existed in the history of the world. And I don't think it should exist ever in the history of the world. But for the most part, I think within your own borders, trade should be as free as possible. And then external trade should be determined by what other priorities we need to keep in place in South Africa. And not just economic priorities, but what about social priorities? Is it good to offshore all this industrialization to China? Not just for economics, but what about the families of the people who work there? What about the mine and the mine workers who've been there forever and their families and that entire vertical? That disappears overnight if we just don't have a stake in mining in some sense. So I don't think the free market is a panacea. Back then, I might have thought that. But now I do see the role of the state in terms of protecting social, moral, and economic things that I wouldn't have considered in the past. But as a principle, the freer, the better. But I think the absolute free market is not a cure, so to speak.
Yeah. There's two things I'm trying to always puzzle out when I talk to free marketeers here is we like calling the African National Congress a socialist, communist, a bunch of whatever. But I'm trying to test how real is that? And what would you do, or what would you like to see, or where would you like the market to be freer than what it is in South Africa? What specifically do you think government needs to not have control over, or we need to turn this key to free the market a little bit more? What would that be in real practical terms?
In real practical terms, it would be just you have to triple the foreign direct investment. Right, I would love to have American companies setting up shop here, or Russian companies, or Australian companies, or whatever the case might be, setting up shop here, and employing people, paying taxes, and all the other good stuff. And that is prevented by the expropriation of race, right, under BEE. And people keep saying BEE is not a problem. Well, it is a real problem. Anyone who reads Thomas Sowell's book, I think it's Affirmative Action in History, or I can't remember what it's called, like has very good clarity on why this is a problem. Like you you give jobs to those who don't need the help, i.e. graduates, right? The average there's more black graduates in South Africa today than at any time in history, but the job market is not growing, so they can't be absorbed into the job market. But so they use BEE, but they don't need it because they're graduates. Like, it doesn't make any sense. You're not helping anyone who is uneducated in that regard. And BEE is also a huge break on foreign direct investments. And the Starlink battle is actually an interesting one, because as soon as it was about ownership, Elon Musk said absolutely not. As soon as it was about social development, for lack of a better term, Elon Musk said yes. We would have done that anyway if you allowed us into your country 2 years ago. But fine, if you want to define how we can better communications for the Navy or for schooling or for whatever the case might be, we'll gladly do that. That's what we do anyway in the country that we go to. You don't have to define it for us, but that's sort of social aid. I don't know what you would call it in essence, but you just need more foreign direct investment, and because there's not enough investment locally to fund economic growth, there just is not that much here. So that's what I would really unlock. Like, just bring everyone and say, have preferential rates, tax rates for 20 years to invest in a factory or invest in a company or invest in a warehouse or a data center. I mean, South Africa is so primed due to its weather, its geography, its culture, to absorb so many more jobs. It's just a lack of will that we haven't, or a very malevolent BE extraction regime.
Yeah.
So that's where the free market will be quite good.
Yeah. We also like to say, it's very popular to say that the ANC has become a nanny state. I think that, and I guess my first question would be, do you agree with that?
No, they're not a nanny at all. They pay protection money, right? So you don't revolt.
That's what you mean with protection money. I talk about social grants is what I'm talking about.
Social grants, the public health care and things like that. I mean, these are given to people not because the ANC cares, but it's a revolution postponing policy.
What are you saying with that? Are you saying, is it the common thing that I hear from a lot of people is that the ANC is so free to give their freebies to everybody because that's buying votes? Is that what you're saying?
So I think it does help with that. It's far less effective than people might believe, because there's so many grant recipients, but only so many people vote for the ANC, and it's about half of recipients in total numbers that vote for the ANC. I'm not saying it's a one-to-one direct correlation. I think there's 27 million recipients, and the ANC only got 8 million votes. So obviously that argument is a bit flat at the moment. But it's what the grant system is a indication and a confirmation that the ANC has totally given up on job creation as a policy. They've never managed to crack it. Thabo Mbeki managed to crack it, but he was a right-wing ideologue who didn't.
It's not the job of the government to create jobs, isn't it? Isn't it the job of the free market and to create jobs?
Yeah, well, that's what I'm referring to. I'm not saying government job. I'm just saying creating jobs as a general rule. The ANC has absolutely no idea how to do it, so they'd rather just give grants to people. And also, based on internal ANC memos and policies dating back over 15 years, I mean, the greatest threat to the ANC is actually an aspiring black middle class that grows, because then what do you need the ANC for? Right?
Yeah.
So I'm not saying they're doing it on purpose, but it's either they don't know how to do it, or B, they're doing it on purpose, or probably a combination of the two.
Yeah. I'm asking you this because I had this discussion with Ronaldo as well, that it's reckoned by smart people that South Africa would need a roughly 8 to 9% annual economic growth rate over an uninterrupted period of at least 10 years to start making a dent in the poverty in South Africa. So we talk about, you've got to make an 8% annual growth rate uninterrupted for at least 10 years more if you want to sustain that, to actually make a dent, to bring unemployment roughly down to, say, roughly 15%, as opposed to where it is standing today. This is what I mentioned to Ronaldo as well, that research will show you, though, that South Africa has never really, in from the creation of the Union of South Africa, for that matter, never been able to reach those kind of growth rates. I think the highest ever was about 6.6% somewhere in the 60s, and it had something to do with gold. I can't remember exactly what the reason for that was. But be it as it may, the average annual real GDP growth rate for South Africa from 1970 to 1994, that's when we became a democracy, was approximately 2.2%. 2.2%. The highest annual growth rate had been, as I said, in between 1970 and 1994 was about 6.5%. That was somewhere in the 80s. That was for 1 or 2 years. Don't know what the specific reason for that was. Why I'm throwing these numbers at you is that everybody is saying we just got to loosen the wheels of the free market. Let the free market do its thing and we will save the future of South Africa. But it will appear to be an almost virtual impossibility to do that with the South African economy. So my question is then, and that's the big question always for me, is to what extent do you need government there to be that nanny state, to have the social system, social grant system that is in fact lacking for that matter? And are we then fair in our criticism of the African National Congress? It will be a miracle indeed. And I think Ronaldo has agreed with me that as well. It'll be a miracle to achieve the kind of economic growth that you want to have under the free market that we're talking about or that we promise.
I agree with you. I think especially now in a sort of globalist world, it's even more difficult. If manufacturing, we don't manufacture anything. We don't have that many minerals and resources under the surface or in our seas, even though they are quite substantial. The timing of these things is far more important than what you actually have. But I mean, if it was up to me, I would keep the grant system going for, not in perpetuity, but for a very long time. But hopefully it is funded by budget surpluses. Remember, Thabo Mbeki and Thabo Manuel had a budget surplus. When not have you heard that in any modern nation?
Thabo Mbeki reaches something like a 4.2 economic growth, which doesn't even begin to touch on what is needed to actually really make an impact.
But the impact that it had at the time, I think it was 5% growth for 3 years in a row from 2004 to 2007. I'm under correction, but I think that is in fact the case. And I do believe that the unemployment rate dropped quite dramatically in his time.
It created hope. It created hope. That's what it did. Whether it changed the landscape, but it created hope. There's no doubt about that.
I'm always a person who says more is better than none, and perfection is the enemy of progress. So why aim for perfection? Let's just try aim for more of the things that actually work, rather than not starting them at all. Because if your goal is impossible, then what is the point of even starting? So the goal is not impossible. The goal is just to increase economic growth. Whether it's 3% or 5% more is better. Even if you never reach 10%, at least it's better than nothing.
Yeah. Well, the reason why I'm asking this, and I keep on hammering on this, is because I also think that we have to be fair and honest to ourselves and to our voters. And everybody is saying, well, just free the free market, and we will, the country will grow and develop, and we will get people out of poverty. And it seems to me the answer to that is no, it's not the case. So the question remains, what exactly do you mean, and what exactly do you need to free when you say free the market? And what do you exactly mean when you say the ANC is a communist or a socialist organization? That's part of the equation. Right. The other thing is when we talk about the people that are dependent on grants in South Africa, there's one we also throw around a lot. A small number of people having to carry the tax burden for a high number of people on social grants. But if you start looking at those social grants, you start talking about 19 million people in South Africa that are directly dependent on social grants. Mm-hmm. This is the breakdown, which I think we should consider. 4 million of those people are old people. 13 million of those people are children. And roughly 1.5 million of those people get disability grants. So we've kind of closed the gap here pretty much already in terms of who actually gets it, and is it in any way, at least morally, justifiable. The rest of it, the 9 million recipients of so-called social relief of distress grants in South Africa, they receive 370 Rand per month. I ask Grok to help me out here. What would a man need to survive for a day in South Africa? And I think that came down to something like 30 Rand a day on food for a poor man, which means that 370 Rand per month is not even going to get food in the stomach of that person.
Yeah.
So I go back to my question then, and I can give you a million reasons why I dislike the African National Congress. The question is what do we really do and what are we really promising? Can we really say they are a nanny state if this is what the figures are all about?
So, I mean, I never said they were a nanny. I don't speak about grants very often because I understand why they exist, and I think South Africa would be a worse place if they did not exist. It's not something I would pursue as a policy personally if I was dictator, but I understand why they exist, and I think, my thinking has changed a little bit in terms of the fact that what are the benefits of being a South African citizen if not for social benefits or freebies or something like that? What is the point of being a citizen if you get nothing for it? So public health, grants, that sort of stuff is very important in that regard. But to answer your question, but Meneer, I do apologize. I need to leave within 1 minute. I've got the school run to attend to. Just for.
Okay, well, let me ask you then one last question. You've just spoken to Connie Mulder. And a lovely discussion. I really enjoyed your discussion with him. Don't you think it's time for you to consider becoming a member of the Freedom Front Plus?
Oh, people are obsessed with me becoming a politician again. Like, my affinity is to my family first and foremost. I will see. Dr. Mulder said he might be interested in meeting me personally. Maybe that will happen. I'm not holding my thumbs. As I said, I'm far less interested now that I've seen how the sausage is made. And I realized maybe I just don't like sausages. To put a crude point on it.
Roman Cabanac, you've got some obligations with your children now. Thank you very much for talking to me. By the way, if you want to follow Roman, go to his YouTube channel. It's Undercurrents, it's called. Roman, thank you very much for indulging me.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you so much. For someone who doesn't debate, you do it very well.
We'll speak again. All the best.
Thank you.